The dust clouds kicked up by expensive horse trailers filled the air as Millbrook's annual rodeo preparations began in earnest. Tommy Fletcher stood at the edge of the fairgrounds, his weathered boots planted firmly in the red dirt, watching as gleaming pickup trucks and luxury horse trailers rolled past him like a parade of wealth he could never touch. His hand rested gently on the neck of his companion, a mare so thin her ribs showed through her dull brown coat like the bars of a forgotten prison. Thunder, as he called her, stood patient and still beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the same quiet determination that had carried both of them through countless hardships. At 15 years old, Tommy had learned that the world didn't offer second chances to boys like him. 3 years had passed since the car accident that claimed both his parents, leaving him with nothing but memories and a horse his father had rescued from a slaughter auction just months before his death. The county had shuffled Tommy between foster homes like a deck of cards nobody wanted to play. The Thunder had remained his constant companion, the one living connection to the family he'd lost. They'd been surviving on their own for the past 6 months, camping in the old abandoned barn on the outskirts of town, living off odd jobs and the kindness of the few people who still believed in helping others without pran. Expecting anything in return, the registration tent buzzed with activity as cowboys and cowgirls prepared for the evening's competition. Tommy approached slowly, Thunder's hooves making soft thuds in the packed earth behind him. The entry fee for the barrel racing competition was $50, money he'd earned by mucking stalls at 3 different ranches over the past 2 weeks. His calloused fingers traced the crumpled bills in his pocket, knowing this represented his last hope of earning enough prize money to secure proper shelter before winter arrived in full force. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The booming voice cut through the crowd like a blade, causing heads to turn and conversations to pause. Marcus Thornfield emerged from behind his pristine silver horse trailer, his expensive cowboy hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. At 52, Marcus owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, and his reputation for ruthless business dealings was matched only by his tendency to remind everyone within earshot of his superiority. His custom-made boots probably cost more than most people made in a month, and his belt buckle caught the afternoon sunlight like a beacon of ostentation. Tommy kept his eyes focused on the registration table, hoping to avoid confrontation, but Marcus had already spotted him and Thunder. The wealthy rancher's laughter carried across the fairgrounds as he gestured dramatically toward the unlikely pair. "Look at this, folks. Looks like we've got ourselves some real competition this year." His voice dripped with sarcasm as thick as molasses, drawing chuckles from the small crowd that had gathered around his trailer. "That poor excuse for a horse. Looks like it belongs in a glue factory, not a rodeo arena." The registration official, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson who had been running rodeo events for over 30 years, looked up from her clipboard with disapproval creasing her features. She recognized the cruelty in Marcus's voice and the vulnerability in Tommy's posture, understanding immediately that she was witnessing the kind of bullying that gave small towns a bad reputation. "Every competitor deserves respect, Mr. Thornfield," she said firmly, though her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many good people beaten down by those with more money than heart. Marcus ignored her rebuke entirely, his attention fixed on Tommy and Thunder, like a predator sizing up prey. "Boy, you can't be serious about entering that bag of bones in a real competition. Hell, I've seen scarecrows with more meat on them." He gestured toward his own horse, a magnificent quarter-horse stallion named Dominator, whose muscles rippled beneath his glossy coat like liquid power. The animal was worth more than most people's houses, bred from champion bloodlines, and trained by the best professionals money could buy. "This here is what a real horse looks like. Maybe you should stick to whatever charity case situation you've got going on, instead of embarrassing yourself in front of the whole town." Tommy's jaw clenched as he felt the familiar heat of shame and anger mixing in his chest like oil and water. He'd heard variations of this speech his entire life, from social workers who looked at him like a burden, from foster families who reminded him daily that he was temporary, from classmates who snickered about his second-hand clothes and free lunch tickets. But something about Marcus's attack on Thunder triggered a protective instinct that ran deeper than his usual tendency to simply endure whatever cruelty came his way. "Thunder's got more heart than any horse I've ever seen," Tommy said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath the surface. "She may not look like much, but she's carried me through some pretty tough times." His hand found Thunder's neck again, fingers tracing the familiar pattern of scars that told the story of her hard life before his father had saved her. The mare pressed her muzzle against his shoulder in a gesture of comfort that spoke louder than any words. Marcus laughed again, the sound harsh and grating like metal scraping against stone. "Heart? Boy, this is a rodeo, not some feel-good story about the power of friendship. You need speed, agility, and breeding to compete at this level. That skeleton you're riding couldn't outrun a three-legged turtle, let alone navigate a barrel course in competitive time." End quote. He turned to address the growing crowd, playing to his audience like a politician at a rally. "Folks, I've been competing in rodeos for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything as pathetic as what's standing in front of us right now." The crowd's reaction was mixed, with some people clearly uncomfortable with Marcus's cruelty, while others seemed entertained by the spectacle. Tommy could feel dozens of eyes on him, measuring, judging, finding him wanting in ways that cut deeper than any physical pain he'd ever experienced. Part of him wanted to turn around and walk away, to spare himself and Thunder the humiliation that seemed inevitable. But another part of him, the part that remembered his father's lessons about standing up for what mattered, refused to back down. "The entry fee is $50, Mrs. Henderson announced loudly, her voice cutting through the tension like a referee calling for order. "Anyone who can pay the fee and meet the safety requirements is welcome to compete." She looked directly at Marcus as she spoke, her message clear despite the diplomatic phrasing. "That's how rodeos work, Mr. Thornfield. They're open to everyone, not just the wealthy." Marcus's face reddened at the implied criticism, his ego bruised by the suggestion that his behavior was inappropriate. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying the promise of future consequences. "Let the kid embarrass himself, but when that walking skeleton collapses in the arena, don't come crying to me about the medical bills." He turned his attention back to Tommy, his eyes cold and calculating. "Tell you what, boy, since you seem so confident in your pathetic excuse for a horse, how about we make this interesting?" Tommy felt his stomach tighten as Marcus's smile took on a predatory quality that reminded him of every authority figure who had ever used their power to make his life more difficult. "What kind of interesting?" he asked cautiously, knowing instinctively that whatever Marcus had in mind would not be in his favor. "A side bet," Marcus announced loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. "If that bag of bones you're riding somehow manages to beat my time in the barrel racing, I'll pay you $1,000 cash money." The crowd murmured with surprise and interest, the sum representing a fortune to most of the working-class families in attendance. "But when you lose, and we both know you will, you pack up that sorry excuse for a horse and get out of this town permanently. We don't need charity cases like you bringing down the quality of our community events." The proposition hit Tommy like a punch to the gut, the casual cruelty of it taking his breath away. Marcus wasn't just proposing a competition. He was attempting to exile Tommy from the only place he'd ever called home, using his wealth and influence to solve what he saw as the problem of poverty by simply making poor people disappear. The crowd fell silent, sensing that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple disagreement between competitors. Tommy looked around at the faces surrounding him, searching for some sign of support or encouragement, but found mostly curiosity and pity. These people had known him his entire life, had watched him grow up in their community, but they also understood the reality of power dynamics in small towns. Marcus Thornfield owned the bank, the largest employer in the county, and half the commercial real estate in town. Cross him publicly, and you might find yourself looking for work or struggling to get a business loan approved. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her expression troubled by the direction the confrontation had taken. "Now hold on, Mr. Thornfield. This is supposed to be a friendly competition, not some kind of winner-take-all showdown. The boy's just trying to compete like everyone else." Her voice carried the authority of decades spent managing rodeo events, but even she seemed uncertain about how to defuse the situation without making things worse for Tommy. "The boy started this by showing up here with that pathetic animal," Marcus replied smoothly, his tone suggesting that he was being perfectly reasonable in his demands. "I'm just trying to help him understand the reality of his situation. Sometimes people need a little motivation to make better choices about their lives." His eyes never left Tommy's face as he spoke, watching for signs of weakness or surrender like a shark detecting blood in the water. Thunder shifted restlessly beside Tommy, as if sensing the tension and danger in the air. The mare's ribs showed clearly beneath her dull coat, evidence of the hard times they'd shared together. But her eyes held an alertness and intelligence that spoke to the spirit Marcus couldn't see. Tommy's father had always told him that Thunder was special, that beneath her unremarkable exterior lay the heart of a champion. But those words felt hollow now in the face of such public humiliation. The weight of the decision pressed down on Tommy's shoulders like a physical burden. Accept Marcus's challenge, and he risked losing the only home he'd ever known, being forced to wander from town to town, with no money, no resources, and no hope of building a stable life. Refuse, and he would have to live with the knowledge that he'd backed down from a bully, that he'd failed to defend Thunder's honor when it mattered most. Either choice seemed designed to destroy something essential about who he was or hoped to become. "I need a minute to think about this," Tommy said quietly, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. He could feel Marcus's satisfaction radiating from the man like heat from a furnace, the wealthy rancher clearly believing that he'd already won the psychological battle regardless of what happened in the arena. "Take all the time you need, boy," Marcus said magnanimously, his tone suggesting that he was being generous by allowing Tommy to consider his options. "But remember, sometimes a man has to know when he's beaten. There's no shame in recognizing that you're outclassed and outgunned." He gestured again toward Dominator, who stood nearby like a living monument to selective breeding and expensive training. "That horse cost me more than most people make in 5 years, and he's trained by professionals who understand what it takes to win at this level." Tommy walked away from the crowd, leading Thunder toward a quiet corner of the fairgrounds where they could have some privacy. The mare followed willingly, her hooves making soft sounds in the dust as they put distance between themselves and the spectacle that had developed around Marcus's challenge. Finding a spot beneath an old oak tree that provided some shade from the afternoon sun, Tommy leaned against Thunder's neck and tried to sort through the emotions churning in his chest like a storm. "What do you think, girl?" he whispered into Thunder's ear, his voice carrying all the uncertainty and fear he couldn't show to the crowd of onlookers. "Your daddy always said you were special, but I don't know if that's enough against what we're up against here." Thunder's response was to nuzzle his shoulder gently, a gesture that had comforted him through countless difficult nights when the world seemed too big and hostile for a boy without family or fortune. As Tommy stood there in the shade, memories of his father flooded back with surprising clarity. David Fletcher had been a horse trainer who specialized in working with damaged and difficult animals, the ones other people had given up on or written off as hopeless cases. He taught Tommy that every horse had a story, that the ones who seemed the most broken often had the most to give, if you could just find the key to unlock their potential. Thunder had been one of those cases, a mare rescued from neglect and abuse who had slowly blossomed under David's patient care. "She's got speed, Tommy," his father had told him during one of their last conversations before the accident. "More than you'd expect from looking at her. But more important than that, she's got the kind of intelligence and heart that can't be bought or bred. Someday, when the moment's right, she's going to surprise everyone who ever underestimated her." At the time, Tommy had thought his father was just being optimistic, trying to make him feel better about having a plain-looking horse when other kids rode flashy purebreds. Now, standing at the crossroads of a decision that could change his life forever, Tommy wondered if his father had somehow known this moment would come. Had David Fletcher seen something in Thunder that even Tommy hadn't recognized? Was there really hidden potential in this thin, unremarkable mare? Or was Tommy about to make the biggest mistake of his young life, based on nothing more than desperate hope and childhood memories? The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Tommy looked up to see Mrs. Henderson walking toward him with a concerned expression on her weathered face. She'd been friends with his parents before the accident, one of the few adults in town who still treated him with genuine kindness, rather than pity or obligation. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her rodeo official's badge caught the sunlight as she moved. "Tommy, honey, you don't have to do this," she said gently, her voice carrying the maternal warmth that had been missing from his life for far too long. "Marcus Thornfield is a bully who gets his kicks from picking on people who can't fight back. Nobody would think less of you for walking away from his nasty little game." She reached out to pat Thunder's neck, her touch gentle and respectful in a way that spoke to her understanding of horses and their importance to the people who love them. "But if I don't take the bet, he wins anyway, doesn't he?" Tommy replied, his voice heavy with the wisdom that came from experiencing too much hardship at too young an age. "He gets to humiliate me in front of the whole town, and everyone sees that having money means you can treat people however you want without consequences. At least if I compete, Thunder and I get a chance to show what we're made of." Bun. Mrs. Henderson sighed deeply, recognizing the truth in Tommy's words, even as she worried about the potential consequences of Marcus's vindictive challenge. "Your father would be proud of the young man you've become," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "David always said that Thunder was special, that she had qualities most people couldn't see. Maybe he was right, and maybe this is your chance to prove it. Do you really think we have a chance?" Tommy asked, allowing himself to voice the hope he'd been afraid to acknowledge. "I mean, really? Against a horse like Dominator and a rider like Marcus?" The question hung in the air between them like a prayer, fragile and desperate, and essential to everything that might come next. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a long moment, studying Thunder with the experienced eye of someone who had evaluated thousands of horses over the decades. What she saw was indeed a thin, unremarkable mare with scars and imperfections that told the story of a hard life. But she also saw something else, something in the horse's bearing, an alertness that reminded her of champions she'd known in the past. "Honey, I've been around horses and rodeos for most of my life," she finally said. "And I've learned that heart and determination can sometimes overcome advantages that seem impossible to beat. Your Thunder's got something in her eyes that I don't see in many horses, especially not the expensive ones." Encouraged by her words, Tommy made his decision with the kind of finality that comes from knowing there's no other choice that will let you live with yourself. "We'll do it," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Thunder and I will take Marcus's bet." The words felt both terrifying and liberating, like jumping off a cliff while hoping you'll discover you can fly. They walked back toward the registration area together, Thunder's hooves beating a steady rhythm that seemed to echo Tommy's heartbeat. The crowd had grown larger during their absence, word of the confrontation having spread throughout the fairgrounds like wildfire. People clustered in small groups, discussing the unprecedented challenge and speculating about its outcome with the kind of excitement that comes from witnessing drama unfold in real time. Marcus stood near his trailer, surrounded by admirers and hangers-on who fed his ego with constant reminders of his superiority and success. Dominator grazed nearby, his perfect conformation and expensive equipment a stark contrast to Thunder's humble appearance. When Marcus saw Tommy approaching, his smile widened with anticipation, clearly expecting to receive the boy's surrender and apology. "Well, boy, have you come to your senses and decided to save yourself some embarrassment?" Marcus called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, his tone suggesting that backing down was the only reasonable choice Tommy could make. "I'm a fair man, so I'm willing to forget this whole unfortunate incident if you just admit that you and that bag of bones don't belong in the same arena as real competitors." "I accept your bet," Tommy announced clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd like a bell tolling. "Thunder and I will race against you and Dominator, and we'll let the clock decide who's right." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, before the crowd erupted in surprised murmurs and excited chatter, the unexpected turn of events adding a layer of drama that transformed a routine rodeo into something growl. Approaching legend. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment, surprise flickering across his features before being replaced by an expression of cold determination. He'd expected Tommy to back down, to slink away in defeat and spare them all the spectacle of an embarrassing loss. The boy's acceptance of the challenge represented a public relations problem that Marcus would need to handle carefully to maintain his reputation as a reasonable and successful businessman. "Fine," Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice lacking the jovial cruelty it had carried moments before. "But don't say I didn't warn you when that skeleton collapses in the arena and makes a fool of both of you. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, I suppose." He turned away abruptly, his body language suggesting that he considered the conversation over and the outcome predetermined. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Tommy spent the time checking Thunder's tack and equipment, making sure everything was as secure and safe as possible given their limited resources. The mare seemed to sense the importance of what was coming, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an alertness and energy that reminded Tommy of his father's words about hidden potential waiting for the right moment to emerge. Other competitors offered words of encouragement and advice, most of them clearly sympathetic to Tommy's position and uncomfortable with Marcus's bullying behavior. Sarah Martinez, a local barrel racer who had known Tommy's parents, stopped by to share some technical tips about navigating the course efficiently. "Don't let him get in your head," she whispered as she adjusted Thunder's bridle. "Confidence is half the battle in barrel racing, and that horse of yours has something special about her. I can feel it." As the sun began to set and the arena lights flickered on, the crowd gathered around the barrel racing course with an excitement that went far beyond the usual interest in local competition. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the community, drawing people who rarely attended rodeo events but couldn't resist witnessing what had become a symbolic battle between wealth and determination, privilege and heart. Marcus had been busy during the preparation time as well, warming up Dominator with a series of practice runs that showcased the horse's power and precision. The stallion moved through the barrel pattern like a machine designed specifically for the task, his muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat as he accelerated, turned, and braked with mechanical efficiency. Watching them practice, it was easy to understand why Marcus felt so confident about the outcome of their challenge. Tommy led Thunder into the warm-up area, conscious of the hundreds of eyes following their every movement. The mare felt different beneath him, more alert and responsive than usual, as if she too understood that this moment represented more than just another competition. Her stride had a spring to it that hadn't been there before, and when Tommy asked her to change direction or adjust her pace, she responded with a quickness that surprised even him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena through the public address system, "we have a special challenge race tonight between Marcus Thornfield riding Dominator and Tommy Fletcher riding Thunder. This is winner-take-all barrel racing at its finest, so let's make some noise for both our competitors." The crowd responded with enthusiastic cheering, though Tommy noticed that the loudest support seemed to be coming from the working-class families in the cheaper seats, rather than the wealthy spectators clustered near Marcus's trailer. The rules were simple and brutal in their clarity. Each rider would make one run through the barrel racing course, and whoever posted the fastest time would be declared the winner. There would be no second chances, no practice runs, no allowances for equipment problems or horse behavior. One run, winner take all, with Tommy's future and the community hanging in the balance like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus had won the coin toss for running order, choosing to go second so that he would know exactly what time he needed to beat. This strategic advantage meant that Tommy and Thunder would have to post their best possible time without knowing whether it would be good enough, while Marcus could adjust his strategy based on their performance. It was yet another way that experience and resources tilted the playing field in favor of the wealthy rancher. Tommy mounted Thunder near the arena entrance, feeling her nervous energy through the saddle as she danced slightly in place. The mare's ears were pricked forward, focused on the barrel course ahead of them like a sprinter studying the track before a race. Her breathing was steady but quick, and Tommy could feel her heart beating through the contact points where their bodies connected. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together as they had faced everything else in their difficult lives. "You ready for this, girl?" Tommy whispered into Thunder's neck, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise and arena sounds. "This is our chance to show everyone what Dad always said about you. Let's make him proud." Thunder's response was to arch her neck slightly and paw the ground once with her front hoof, a gesture that seemed to say she was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. The gates swung open, and Tommy urged Thunder into the arena at a controlled lope, taking a moment to let her see the course and get her bearings in the bright lights and crowd noise. The 3 barrels were arranged in the standard triangular pattern, and the timer would start when they crossed the electronic beam at the entrance. From that moment, everything would depend on Thunder's speed, agility, and willingness to trust Tommy's guidance through the tight turns and precise lines that separated winning times from average ones. Tommy positioned Thunder behind the starting line, feeling the tension in her muscles as she coiled like a spring waiting to be released. The crowd fell silent, thousands of people holding their breath as they prepared to witness either a miraculous upset or a heartbreaking confirmation of the harsh realities that governed their world. In the announcer's booth, the official timer waited with his finger poised over the start button, ready to begin the most important 15 seconds of Tommy Fletcher's young life. "Timer ready," the announcer called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet arena. "Rider ready?" Tommy raised his hand to signal his readiness, then leaned forward in the saddle and gathered Thunder's reins in preparation for their run. "Go when ready." Tommy squeezed his legs against Thunder's sides and felt the mare explode forward with a power and suddenness that caught him completely off guard. Instead of the steady, workmanlike acceleration he'd expected, Thunder launched herself toward the first barrel with the kind of explosive speed he'd only seen in expensive quarter horses bred specifically for calf racing. Her hooves hammered against the arena dirt in a rhythm that sounded like thunder, each stride covering more ground than Tommy had imagined possible. The first barrel rushed toward them at an alarming rate, and Tommy had to adjust his mental timing as Thunder approached the turn faster than they'd ever attempted before. He shifted his weight and applied subtle rein pressure to guide her around the barrel, holding his breath as her inside shoulder nearly brushed the metal container. But Thunder's body seemed to know exactly how much space she needed, her muscles flowing like liquid as she bent around the turn without losing momentum or balance. Coming out of the first turn, Thunder straightened and accelerated again, her stride lengthening as she charged toward the second barrel on the far side of the arena. Tommy could hear the crowd beginning to react with surprise and excitement, their voices creating a wave of sound that seemed to propel horse and rider forward with additional energy. He'd never felt anything like the sensation of riding Thunder at full speed, the pure joy and power of a horse finally allowed to show her true capabilities. The second barrel appeared ahead of them, and Tommy prepared for another lightning-fast turn. Thunder seemed to read his mind, setting herself up for the approach with the kind of intelligence and anticipation that separated great barrel horses from merely fast ones. She dove into the turn with her body low and her inside legs reaching for maximum traction, her tail streaming behind her like a banner as she carved through the arc with mathematical precision. Tommy's heart hammered in his chest as they straightened and headed for the third and final barrel, Thunder's breathing still steady despite the incredible pace she'd maintained throughout the run. The mare felt like she was just getting warmed up, her stride still powerful, and her responsiveness to his cues as sharp as it had been at the beginning. Whatever reserves of speed and athleticism his father had seen in her were finally being revealed under the bright arena lights and the pressure of competition. The final barrel rushed toward them, and Tommy knew that this turn would determine everything. Too wide, and they'd lose precious time that could cost them the victory. Too tight, and they risked knocking over the barrel for a devastating 5-second penalty that would make their time uncompetitive regardless of how fast they'd run the rest of the course. Thunder seemed to understand the stakes as well, her ears flicking back toward Tommy as if asking for his trust in her judgment. She took the final barrel like she'd been training for this moment her entire life, her body bending around the turn with a grace and efficiency that belonged in training videos for aspiring barrel racers. Tommy felt her hindquarters slide slightly as she pushed off the turn, using every ounce of her athletic ability to maintain speed while changing direction in the tightest possible arc. They were flying now, the finish line racing toward them as Thunder extended her stride one final time. They crossed the electronic beam in a thunderous rush of hoofbeats and crowd noise, Tommy's heart soaring as he felt Thunder's incredible effort come to an end. The mare was breathing hard but not distressed, her head high and her ears pricked forward as if she was proud of what they'd accomplished together. Tommy leaned forward to pat her neck, his hand trembling with adrenaline and emotion as he tried to process what had just happened. The arena fell silent as everyone waited for the official time to be announced. Tommy could see Marcus near the entrance gate, his face tight with concentration as he prepared for his own run, but there was something different about his expression now, a wariness that hadn't been there before Thunder's cough. Surprising performance. Dominator stood ready beside him, powerful and professional, But somehow the stallion's perfection seemed less intimidating after witnessing Thunder's natural talent and heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, building suspense with practiced timing. "Tommy Fletcher and Thunder have posted a time of 15.23 seconds. The crowd erupted in surprised cheers and applause, the time representing a genuinely competitive performance that few people had expected from the unlikely pair. Tommy felt tears of relief and pride welling up in his eyes as he realized they'd given everything they had and run a time that would be respectable in any competition. Marcus's face had gone pale as he processed the implications of Tommy's time. 15.23 seconds was faster than many of Dominator's practice runs, and it meant that Marcus would need to push his expensive horse to the absolute limit to secure victory. What had seemed like an easy opportunity to humiliate a poor kid had suddenly become a genuine competition that could go either way, with his reputation and credibility on the line, in front of hundreds of witnesses. Tommy rode Thunder out of the arena to thunderous applause, the crowd showing their appreciation for an unexpected and thrilling performance. As they passed the fence line where spectators had gathered, Tommy could see people pointing and talking excitedly, their expressions reflecting amazement at what they'd just witnessed. Children pressed against the rail, their eyes wide with wonder as Thunder walked past, no longer seeing a thin, unremarkable horse, but rather a champion who had revealed her true nature when it mattered most. Mrs. Henderson met them at the gate, her face glowing with pride and excitement as she reached up to pat both Tommy and Thunder. "I knew she had it in her," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud of both of you right now. That was some of the finest riding I've ever seen, and Thunder ran like the champion she's always been inside." Her words meant more to Tommy than any prize money could have, validation from someone who understood horses and had known his family. Now, it was Marcus's turn to face the pressure of performance, and Tommy could see the tension in the wealthy rancher's shoulders as he mounted Dominator and prepared for their run. The stallion was magnificent, his muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat as he moved with the kind of controlled power that came from breeding and professional training. But there was something mechanical about his movement, a lack of the joy and natural athleticism that Thunder had displayed during her run. Marcus rode into the arena with his jaw set and his eyes focused solely on the barrel course ahead. He'd built his reputation on always having the best equipment and the most advantages. But now he faced the possibility of being beaten by a poor orphan boy riding a horse that looked like it belonged in a rescue facility rather than a competition arena. The irony was not lost on the crowd, many of whom had shifted their allegiance to the underdog during the course of the evening. Tommy watched from the sidelines as Marcus positioned Dominator behind the starting line, the stallion's breeding and training evident in every line of his conformation. This was what a quarter horse was supposed to look like: powerful hindquarters and a deep chest that promised speed and athleticism. But as Tommy studied horse and rider, he noticed something that gave him hope. Marcus looked tense, his usual confidence replaced by the kind of pressure that could interfere with the split-second timing that barrel racing demanded. "Timer ready? Rider ready?" the announcer called out, and Marcus raised his hand to signal his readiness. "Go when ready." Marcus spurred Dominator forward, and the stallion responded with impressive acceleration, his stride eating up the ground toward the first barrel with the kind of power that money could buy. But there was something forced about their partnership, a lack of the natural harmony that had characterized Tommy and Thunder's run. Dominator attacked the first barrel with mechanical precision, his turn technically correct, but lacking the fluid grace that had marked Thunder's approach. Marcus was riding aggressively, pushing for maximum speed, but the pressure seemed to be affecting his timing and judgment. The stallion sensed his rider's tension, his ears pinning back slightly as he responded to cues that were harder and more demanding than usual. The second barrel approached rapidly, and Marcus set Dominator up for the turn with the kind of technical skill that came from years of expensive training. But as they dove into the arc, the stallion's inside shoulder brushed the barrel, causing it to rock precariously without falling over. The near miss cost them momentum and threw off their rhythm, Dominator having to work harder to regain his stride coming out of the turn. Tommy held his breath as he watched Marcus and Dominator approach the final barrel, knowing that this turn would determine the outcome of their challenge. The stallion was still moving fast, his power and breeding evident in every stride. But there was a mechanical quality to his performance that contrasted sharply with Thunder's natural flow and timing. Marcus was pushing hard, perhaps too hard, his desperation to win affecting the partnership that Darrell Racing demanded. The final turn was technically clean, but wide, Dominator's path around the barrel taking more time than necessary as Marcus played it safe to avoid a costly penalty. The stallion straightened and charged toward the finish line, his stride powerful but lacking the explosive acceleration that Thunder had shown in the same stretch. As they crossed the electronic beam, Tommy could see exhaustion in Dominator's breathing and tension in Marcus's posture. The arena fell silent again, as everyone waited for the official time, the tension palpable as hundreds of people held their breath. Tommy felt Thunder shift beneath him, the mare alert and interested in what was happening around them, her earlier run having transformed her from a tired, unremarkable horse into something that radiated confidence and pride. Whatever happened next, they had proven themselves in a way that no one could ever take away from them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent arena. "Marcus Thornfield and Dominator have posted a time of 15.31 seconds. The crowd exploded in stunned cheers and applause as the reality of the upset sank in. Tommy Fletcher and his useless horse had not only competed respectably, they had won, beating one of the area's most successful competitors and his expensive, professionally trained stallion. Tommy sat in stunned silence for a moment, unable to fully process what had just happened. Thunder had beaten Dominator by 0.08 of a second, a narrow margin that represented the difference between vindication and exile, between proving his father's faith and losing everything he'd ever known. The mare beneath him seemed to understand the significance of their victory, her head high and her ears pricked forward as she absorbed the crowd's enthusiastic response. Marcus's face had gone through several shades of red and white as he processed his defeat. The wealthy rancher clearly struggling to accept that his expensive equipment and professional advantages had been overcome by heart, determination, and natural talent. He dismounted Dominator with stiff, jerky movements, his body language reflecting the kind of shock that comes from having fundamental assumptions challenged and proven wrong. The crowd was on its feet now, their cheers echoing across the arena like thunder rolling through a valley. Tommy could see faces in the stands that he'd known his entire life, people who had watched him grow up as the orphan son of David Fletcher, and their expressions reflected a mixture of joy, pride, and amazement that seemed to validate every struggle he'd endured over the past 3 years. Children were jumping up and down, pointing at Thunder with excitement, while their parents applauded with the kind of genuine enthusiasm that came from witnessing something truly special. Mrs. Henderson appeared at Tommy's side, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached up to embrace both boy and horse. "I've been running rodeos for over 30 years, she said, her voice choked with emotion. "And I've never seen anything like what just happened here tonight. Your Thunder didn't just win a race, she won hearts and changed minds about what's possible when someone refuses to give up." Her words carried the weight of official recognition, transforming Tommy's victory from a simple competition result into something approaching legend. Tommy dismounted slowly, his legs shaky with adrenaline and emotion as he stood beside Thunder and tried to absorb the magnitude of what they'd accomplished together. The mare nuzzled his shoulder gently, her breathing still elevated from their run, but her demeanor calm and proud, as if she'd always known this moment would come if they just waited for the right opportunity. Her ribs still showed beneath her dull coat, and the scars of her hard life remained visible, but now these imperfections seemed like badges of honor rather than signs of inadequacy. Marcus approached them with heavy, reluctant steps, his face a mask of barely controlled emotions as he struggled to process his defeat. The wealthy rancher had built his identity around having the best of everything, and losing to Tommy Fletcher's rescued mare represented a fundamental challenge to his worldview that went far beyond the simple mechanics of a barrel racing competition. His expensive hat was tilted at an angle that suggested internal turmoil, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. "I suppose a bet is a bet," Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice lacking any of the jovial confidence it had carried just an hour earlier. He pulled out a thick wad of cash, counting out 10 $100 bills with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested he was trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. $1,000, as agreed. He held the money out toward Tommy, his eyes avoiding direct contact as if looking at the boy might force him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his behavior. Tommy stared at the money for a long moment, the bills representing more cash than he'd seen in one place since his parents' death. $1,000 could solve so many of his immediate problems, providing food, shelter, and basic necessities that would allow him and Thunder to survive the coming winter in relative comfort. But as he looked at Marcus's defeated expression and heard the continued cheers from the crowd, Tommy realized that something more important than money had been won tonight. "Keep your money, Mr. Thornfield," Tommy said quietly, his voice carrying clearly despite the crowd noise. "I didn't make this bet to get rich. I made it to prove that Thunder and I belong here as much as anyone else." His words seemed to hang in the air between them, creating a moment of profound silence as Marcus processed the unexpected response. The wealthy rancher's expression shifted from defeat to confusion, to something that might have been respect, though it was hard to tell in the arena's bright lights. The crowd had grown quiet again, sensing that they were witnessing another dramatic turn in an evening that had already exceeded everyone's expectations. Tommy's refusal of the prize money represented something larger than simple generosity, a statement about values and character that resonated with people who understood what it meant to struggle and persevere, despite overwhelming disadvantages. "What I want," Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "is for you to remember this night the next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong. Thunder taught me that appearances can be deceiving, and that heart and determination matter more than fancy equipment or perfect breeding." He reached out to pat Thunder's neck, the gesture encompassing everything they'd shared and overcome together. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before judging someone based on what they look like, instead of what they're capable of achieving." Marcus stood in stunned silence for several seconds, the money still extended in his hand as he struggled to formulate a response to Tommy's unexpected magnanimity. The wealthy rancher had prepared himself for gloating or demands for additional concessions, but Tommy's grace and victory had caught him completely off guard. For perhaps the first time in years, Marcus found himself at a loss for words, his usual confidence and superiority stripped away by the simple dignity of a 15-year-old boy who had just beaten him in Ascane, his own game. I don't understand," Marcus finally managed, his voice uncertain and confused. "You won the bet fairly. The money is yours by right." He looked around at the crowd, as if seeking guidance from the hundreds of faces that surrounded them, but found only expectant silence as people waited to see how this extraordinary evening would conclude. "Some things are more valuable than money," Tommy replied, his words carrying the wisdom that came from experiencing loss, hardship, and the kind of adversity that taught essential lessons about what really mattered in life. "Tonight, Thunder and I proved that we belong here, that we're part of this community, whether people like it or not. That's worth more than any amount of cash." He looked directly at Marcus as he spoke, his young eyes holding a strength and maturity that seemed to age him beyond his 15 years. The crowd began to applaud again, slowly at first, but building to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. People were standing on their seats, cheering and whistling with an enthusiasm that went far beyond appreciation for athletic performance. They were celebrating something fundamental about human nature, the triumph of character over circumstances, the victory of heart over advantages that money could buy. Sarah Martinez, the experienced barrel racer who had offered Tommy advice earlier in the evening, pushed through the crowd to reach them. "Tommy, that was the most incredible riding I've ever seen," she said, her own voice filled with admiration and respect. "Thunder moved like she was born to run barrels, and you rode her like you'd been partners for decades instead of years." She turned to examine Thunder more closely, her experienced eye taking in details that casual observers might miss. "This mare has world-class bloodlines hidden somewhere in her background. Nobody runs like that without genetic gifts, regardless of how they look on the surface." Other competitors began gathering around Tommy and Thunder, offering congratulations and expressing amazement at the evening's unexpected outcome. These were people who understood horses and barrel racing at a deep level, and their recognition carried weight that went beyond simple politeness or sympathy for an underdog. They were acknowledging that what they'd witnessed represented genuine talent and achievement, not just luck or sentiment. Dr. Amanda Foster, the local veterinarian who had treated Thunder during her recovery from various injuries over the years, worked her way through the crowd with a broad smile on her face. "I always knew this mare was special," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "When Tommy's father first brought her to my clinic, she was in terrible condition, but there was something in her eyes that told me she had more to give than most people could see. Tonight proved that David Fletcher's instincts about horses were as good as everyone always said they were." The mention of his father's name brought fresh tears to Tommy's eyes, the validation of David Fletcher's judgment representing a connection to family and heritage that had seemed lost forever in the aftermath of the accident. Tommy remembered countless conversations with his father about Thunder's potential, discussions that had seemed like wishful thinking at the time, but now revealed themselves as the accurate assessments of an expert horseman who could see beyond surface appearances to underlying truth. Marcus had been standing quietly during these exchanges, the money still clutched in his hand as he watched the community rally around Tommy and Thunder with an enthusiasm that highlighted his own isolation and unpopularity. The wealthy rancher was beginning to understand that his defeat represented more than just losing a competition. It was a public rejection of the values and attitudes he had embodied for so many years. "Please," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the congratulations and conversations surrounding them. "Please take the money. I need you to take it." His words carried a desperation that surprised everyone who heard them, including Tommy, who turned to study the older man's face with curiosity rather than triumph. "I said things tonight that I shouldn't have said, about you and about Thunder. I was wrong, and I need to make it right somehow." Tommy looked at Marcus for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant bully who had tried to humiliate him earlier, but rather a man who was genuinely struggling with the implications of his own behavior and its consequences. The crowd had grown quiet again, sensing that this conversation represented another pivotal moment in an evening that had already transformed their understanding of several fundamental assumptions about their community and Cain, its values. "Mr. Thornfield," Tommy said carefully, choosing his words with the kind of precision that reflected his understanding of the moment's importance. "I don't want your money because I don't want this to be about punishment or making you feel bad about yourself. What I want is for tonight to be about second chances and seeing people for who they really are inside." He gestured toward Thunder, who stood quietly beside him like a living example of his point. "Look at Thunder. 3 hours ago you called her useless and said she belonged in a glue factory. Now you know better, because you've seen what she's capable of when given a fair chance." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression reflecting the kind of deep thought that comes from having fundamental beliefs challenged and found wanting. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice lacking any of the bombast and arrogance that had characterized his earlier comments. "I looked at her and saw only what I expected to see, not what was actually there. I did the same thing with you, didn't I? I saw a poor kid with a skinny horse and assumed I knew everything there was to know about your story." "Everyone makes assumptions sometimes," Tommy replied generously, his response reflecting a maturity that impressed even the adults who were listening. "The important thing is being willing to admit when you're wrong and learning from the experience. That's what my father always taught me anyway." His mention of David Fletcher served as a reminder of the values that had shaped his character and guided his responses throughout this difficult evening. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her official badge catching the arena lights as she moved. "Marcus, why don't you keep that money and use it to sponsor some of the younger riders who might need help with entry fees or equipment?" she suggested diplomatically. "That would be a way to honor what happened here tonight, and maybe help some other kids who are facing the same kinds of challenges Tommy has been dealing with." Her proposal offered Marcus a path toward redemption that didn't require self-abasement or public humiliation. The suggestion seemed to energize Marcus in a way that surprised everyone watching, his posture straightening as he considered the possibilities inherent in Mrs. Henderson's idea. That's actually a wonderful suggestion," he said, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm for the first time all evening. "I could set up a fund for young riders who need financial assistance to compete. Maybe call it the Thunder Fund, in honor of what we learned here tonight." His eyes brightened as he warmed to the concept, perhaps seeing an opportunity to transform his defeat into something positive and constructive. Tommy felt a warmth spreading through his chest as he listened to Marcus's proposal, understanding that his victory had accomplished something far more important than winning a competition or earning prize money. The events of the evening had created an opportunity for genuine change, not just in his own circumstances, but in the attitudes and behaviors of people throughout their community. Thunder's performance had served as a catalyst for conversations and realizations that might never have occurred otherwise. "I think that's a great idea, Mr. Thornfield," Tommy said sincerely, his response reflecting genuine approval rather than mere politeness. "There are probably lots of kids out there who love horses and want to compete but can't afford entry fees or proper equipment. If tonight's race can help some of them get started, then Thunder and I really will have accomplished something special." His words carried the kind of selflessness that impressed everyone who heard them, further cementing his reputation as someone whose character matched his surprising riding ability. The crowd began to disperse gradually, people heading toward the parking areas while discussing the evening's events with the kind of animated conversation that suggested the story would be retold and embellished for years to come. Children pressed against their parents, begging to pet Thunder before leaving, and the mare seemed to enjoy the attention. Her ears pricked forward as she accepted gentle touches and whispered compliments with patient dignity. Tommy led Thunder toward the trailer area, his mind still reeling from the rapid sequence of events that had transformed his life in the space of a few hours. This morning he'd been a struggling orphan with an uncertain future, sleeping in an abandoned barn and working odd jobs to survive. Tonight, he was the talk of the county, the boy who had ridden his useless horse to victory against impossible odds, and then shown grace and wisdom beyond his years in handling his triumph. As they walked through the fairgrounds, Tommy noticed that people were looking at him and Thunder differently now, their expressions reflecting respect and admiration rather than the pity or dismissal he'd grown accustomed to receiving. Children pointed excitedly as they passed, and several adults approached to offer congratulations and express amazement at Thunder's performance. The transformation was almost overwhelming, the sudden shift from invisibility to celebrity requiring mental adjustments that Tommy wasn't sure how to make. Dr. Foster caught up with them near the parking area, her veterinary bag in one hand and a concerned expression on her face. "Tommy, I'd like to give Thunder a quick examination if you don't mind," she said professionally. "That was an incredibly demanding performance, and I want to make sure she's not experiencing any soreness or strain that might need attention." Her offer represented the kind of professional care that Tommy usually couldn't afford. Another example of how the evening's events were opening doors that had previously been closed to him. Thunder stood patiently as Dr. Foster conducted her examination, the mare's behavior calm and cooperative despite the excitement and activity surrounding them. The veterinarian's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking muscles, joints, and vital signs with the thoroughness that came from decades of experience treating performance horses. Her expression remained neutral throughout the process, giving no indication of her findings until she'd completed her evaluation. "She's in remarkable condition considering what she just accomplished," Dr. Foster announced with obvious satisfaction. "Her heart rate and respiration are already returning to normal, and I don't detect any signs of strain or injury. This mare is a natural athlete, Tommy. Whatever genetic gifts she's carrying, they're the real deal." Her professional assessment carried weight with everyone who heard it, further validating Tommy's father's faith in Thunder's hidden potential. As Dr. Foster packed up her equipment, she pulled Tommy aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that what happened tonight has given me some ideas about Thunder's background," she said quietly, her voice carrying the excitement of discovery. "I've been thinking about her conformation and the way she moves, and I suspect she might have some very interesting bloodlines that weren't documented when your father rescued her. Would you be interested in having some genetic testing done to see what we can learn about her heritage?" Tommy's eyes widened at the suggestion, understanding that such testing could provide answers to questions that had puzzled him and his father for years. "That sounds amazing, Dr. Foster, but I probably can't afford that kind of testing," he said honestly, his practical nature asserting itself despite his excitement about the possibility of learning more about Thunder's background. "Don't worry about the cost," Dr. Foster replied with a warm smile. "After what I witnessed tonight, I'm more than happy to cover the expenses myself. Consider it my contribution to solving one of the most interesting mysteries I've encountered in my veterinary practice. Besides, If Thunder does have the kind of bloodlines I suspect, the information could be valuable for a lot of reasons beyond simple curiosity. The offer represented another unexpected gift resulting from their victory, but more importantly, it suggested that Tommy and Thunder's story was far from over. The evening's triumph had been just the beginning of a journey that might lead to discoveries and opportunities they couldn't even imagine yet. Tommy felt a sense of anticipation building in his chest, the feeling that their lives were about to change in ways that went far beyond the immediate satisfaction of proving their worth to the community. Sarah Martinez approached them as they prepared to leave the fairgrounds, her expression thoughtful and purposeful. "Tommy, I've been thinking about what happened tonight, and I have a proposition for you," she said seriously. "I run a small training facility about 20 miles from here, and I specialize in developing young horses and riders who show exceptional promise. After watching you and Thunder perform tonight, I'd like to offer you both the opportunity to train with me on a regular basis." The offer took Tommy's breath away, representing the kind of professional guidance and facility access that he'd never dreamed possible given his financial circumstances. Sarah Martinez was known throughout the region as one of the most skilled and successful barrel racing instructors, and her students regularly competed at state and national levels. Training with her would open doors to competitions and opportunities that could transform Tommy's entire future. "I don't know if I can afford professional training," Tommy said honestly, though his heart was racing with excitement at the possibility. "Money's been pretty tight since my parents died, and I've been working just to cover basic expenses for Thunder and myself." His practical concerns warred with his dreams, creating the kind of internal conflict that had characterized much of his life since becoming an orphan. "I'm not talking about charging you standard rates," Sarah replied, with a knowing smile. "What I'm proposing is more like a partnership. You and Thunder have raw talent that money can't buy. But you need guidance and facility access to develop that talent to its full potential. I need students who are serious about the sport and willing to work hard to improve. It seems like we could help each other out." Her proposal represented the kind of opportunity that could change everything, offering Tommy a path toward a future he'd never dared to imagine. Tommy looked at Thunder, seeing his own excitement reflected in the mare's alert expression and pricked ears. The horse seemed to understand that important decisions were being made, her attention focused on the humans around her as if she were following the conversation and evaluating the possibilities being discussed. Whatever they decided, they would face the future together, as they had faced every challenge in their difficult lives. "I'd like to think about it overnight," Tommy said carefully, his response reflecting the kind of deliberate decision-making that had helped him survive as an orphan. "This has been an incredible evening, but I want to make sure I'm thinking clearly before I commit to anything major. Thunder and I have been through a lot together, and I don't want to make any decisions that might not be in her best interests." His cautious approach impressed the adults around him, further evidence of the maturity and wisdom that had been forged by hardship and loss. "Take all the time you need," Sarah replied understandingly. "My offer will be there whenever you're ready to discuss it further. Just know that opportunities like this don't come along very often, and talent like yours deserves to be developed and showcased." Her words carried the weight of professional recognition, acknowledgement from someone who understood the sport at its highest levels, that Tommy and Thunder possessed something genuinely special. As the last of the crowd dispersed and the arena lights began to dim, Tommy led Thunder toward the old pickup truck he'd borrowed from one of his part-time employers. The vehicle was hardly in better condition than Thunder had appeared to be earlier in the evening, its dented fenders and rust spots telling their own story of hard use and financial limitations. But tonight, the truck seemed adequate for their purposes, a reliable means of transport for a boy and horse who had just proven that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. Loading Thunder into the borrowed trailer, Tommy took a moment to run his hands along her neck and shoulders. Feeling the slight dampness of sweat from their earlier run and the steady rhythm of her breathing as she settled into the familiar confines of their transportation, the mare's eyes were bright and alert, showing none of the exhaustion he might have expected after such a demanding performance. If anything, Thunder seemed energized by their success, as if the competition had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. As they drove away from the fairgrounds, Tommy could see the arena lights fading in his rearview mirror, but the memories of the evening burned bright in his mind, like stars that would never dim. In the space of a few hours, he and Thunder had gone from being objects of ridicule and pity to symbols of hope and possibility, proof that determination and heart could overcome advantages that seemed insurmountable. Their victory had been about more than barrel racing. It had been about dignity, respect, and the fundamental belief that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth. The road ahead stretched into darkness, illuminated only by the truck's headlights and the promise of a future that suddenly seemed filled with possibilities Tommy had never dared to imagine. Behind them, the story of their triumph was already beginning to spread throughout the community, carried by text messages and phone calls that would ensure the tale of Tommy Fletcher and his miracle horse would be remembered and retold for generations to come. Thunder shifted slightly in the trailer, her hooves making soft sounds against the metal floor as she adjusted her balance for the journey home. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whether it was training opportunities, genetic discoveries, or simply the continuation of their simple life together, they would face it as partners who had proven themselves capable of achieving the impossible when it mattered most. The orphan boy and his rescued horse had found their moment of glory, and in doing so, they had reminded an entire community about the power of hope, determination, and the unbreakable bonds that could develop between those who refused to give up on each other. As they disappeared into the night, the fairgrounds settled into quiet darkness, but the echoes of their triumph continued to resonate in the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed something truly extraordinary. Tommy Fletcher and Thunder had not only won a competition, they had won something far more valuable: the respect of their community and the knowledge that they belonged exactly where they were, regardless of what anyone else might think about their appearance or circumstances. In a world that often seemed to value superficial advantages over genuine character, they had proven that the most important victories were won not with money or breeding, but with heart, courage, and an unshakable belief in the power of second chances.